This is the BBC.
Dear brothers and sisters, all are welcome here at the Confessions podcast, whether saint or sinner.
Hello everybody and welcome to the Confessions podcast from your friends at BBC Radio 2. It's my special
Yes, it is. Your special
voice.
Intro laugh, yeah.
This is where, as you know, incredibly sinful members... If you could sort of guess which audiences had the most sins to confess, would it be Radio 2? Would it be Radio 4, Radio 3? I think it's clearly the Radio 2 audience. Tales of deceit, debauchery and deception. Here we go with Sister Bobby and Brother Matt just sitting here ready to enjoy it all over again.
Yes, please.
Katie's shocking confession, Our Friend's Pathetic, which is, I do like, that's a good title. Sarah's unfortunate incident, An Interview to a Kill. Aaron's Sisters of Mercy story. Plus, we've unearthed another classic confession from the crypt as chosen by you. But we're going to start with Jack's tale, Sinner in the Bathroom.
Simon Mayo's Confessions podcast. Please be seated.
Father Simon and the Merciful Menagerie. It's October 1984. I was in the Royal Navy and had just returned from a long and arduous patrol aboard one of the UK's finest submarines. Watchkeeping at sea for such a length of time means one tends to forget the realities of life, such as what day or month it is, or even whether it would be light or dark. I slept, ate, worked and slept some more. Around the end of the patrol, I'd begun to fester with a nasty cough and general feelings of unwellness, but being a roughy-tufty kind of guy, I just got on with it. Shoot forward a month, into mid-November, I'd returned to Plymouth to try and sort out the second floor of what's called our married quarters. It's fair to say the married quarters were quite a dump and needed a fair bit of doing to them, especially as my now wife had moved in to join me in Plymouth. Unfortunately, I was still hacking and throwing phlegm everywhere. Oh, by the way, I was supposed to say... Sorry. Just noticed. Yeah. You might just want to give a little warning for people...
maybe before we got to the hacking. Yeah.
Virus alert.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, so if you're eating... Sorry. It's only a PG.
Okay.
That's not the PG bit, but I'm just saying.
My goodness.
But I was still acting roughy-tufty, so I threw off my wife's concerns and I just got on with the job. That's because that's what I do, because I'm a roughy-tufty kind of guy. However, as I attempted to knock the flat into some sort of shape, I noticed there was a particularly stubborn patch of mould fungus on the bathroom tiles. Nothing I had in the house would shift it, so I had to wander down to the shipyard stores and purloin some substance the stores folk assured me would, and I quote, take lead off a roof. See, I think this kind of thing you might get in a shipyard store, but you wouldn't get from your local DIY.
So it's got to be good.
As I walked back to the flat, I was struck with a mischievous thought, and the most brilliant idea was hatched. Oh, so I thought. So brilliant, it was like a brilliant fox with a degree in brilliantness from the University of Brilliant Town. Well, at least I thought it was, anyway. We shall see. As I used my newly acquired chemical to remove the fungus-encrusted tiles from the bathroom walls, I decided to ramp up my coughing and wheezing somewhat. My wife, who was downstairs at her new friend's flat, couldn't help but hear my exaggerated wheezing and came up the stairs to check on her loved one. It was here that I put my plan into action and I pretended to faint. I lay on the bathroom floor because it would make her think that I'd passed out. What japes in the Navy, huh?
What could possibly go wrong?
Although she'd initially been worried, I reasoned, I knew that once my ruse was up, my wife and I would laugh merrily whilst quaffing a fine beverage, or something like that. And all went very well until she opened the bathroom door, and the tile-removing chemicals hit her like a freight train. So quickly did my wife turn her head away from the chemical weapon that unfortunately she slammed her nose bang into the doorframe. As the doorframe had probably been there since the Boer War, it didn't move one bit. Though unfortunately, my wife's nose did, to her right cheek. This obviously caused her nose to start bleeding, and whilst trying to stem the flow, she ended up with blood over her hands, over her face, and over... That's the PG bit, right?
Okay.
Over her hands and clothes and everywhere, basically. As my injured wife staggered down the hallway, clutching her bust nose, her new best friend, who'd been sitting downstairs, as I mentioned, arrived to help, took one look at my wife and fainted. How was I to know the friend suffered from haemophobia, which is the extreme fear of blood?
Yeah.
At this point, I should probably also point out that the woman's husband had also been sitting with them in the flat downstairs, and after hearing the commotion was on his way up. What on earth was I to do? Well, me being the roughy-tufty kind of guy that I was, I stayed put on the bathroom floor, pretending to be unconscious. The scene must have been straight out of a horror film. His wife, face down on the floor, not moving. My wife, wandering around like a zombie, splattered in her own blood. And me, half in, half out the bathroom, seemingly unconscious. Well, after screaming for a bit, he phoned for an ambulance. And by the time it arrived, my wife's friend had regained some consciousness and was complaining of a sore wrist. Meanwhile, my wife had grabbed a towel and was sat in the hall with her head buried in it. As for me, I continued my unconscious act, only slowly starting to come round a little bit as the paramedics arrived. As I was the only person still not fully conscious, I became the ambulance folks' priority, and I was duly strapped into a chair, hoisted down 2 flights of stairs, and whisked off to hospital. Still covered in blood, my wife had to drive herself.
Oh, my goodness.
4 miles to the hospital, along with her maybe not now best friend, who was crying and sobbing quite loudly. I really am truly apologetic about my antics and feel a great weight has been lifted as I write these words after telling my tale. I can't apologise more to my wife for her broken nose, nor the unpleasant minor surgery to correct the bends that meant it favoured her right cheek. I'm less sorry for her new best friend and husband as they shipped out a few weeks later to Hong Kong, never to be seen again. Well, by us, anyway. I mean, it's been fine.
Yes.
Oops. But it turns out my own trip to hospital wasn't wasted. The aforementioned cough and splutters turned out to be pneumonia, which we've already mentioned once, and the doctors also found some very bizarre burning to the inside of my lungs, which to this day they could not explain. I spent the next 3 weeks in hospital with my very attentive and caring wife at my bedside, and to show how much I cared, I never once mentioned the 2 large rolls of dressing stuffed up her nose with a sling contraption holding it all in place. However, here's the thing. After 35 years, it's probably about time she knew what actually happened. So this is another confession where this incident is, of course, very well known within Jack's nautical circles. However, the whole thing was a fabrication. And he never passed out because of the fumes. He wasn't even passed out at all. He was just pretending. Anyway, I like the sound of the stores that he bought his special chemicals in. What do you say to that, Sister Bobby?
Oh, I couldn't see the jape in this. Look, I love hijinks, but I couldn't see what he was trying to get at. I don't know what he was trying to intend.
Trying to scare his
well,
new wife.
Yeah, but for what effect? Was it because that's it, is you don't know the consequences, and you're not 5. When you're 5, it's funny, but not when you're 25. And the other thing is, this is why, Jack, I can't forgive you. I can't forgive you because you injured 2 other people. You wasted an ambulance time, even though you did have pneumonia. That also I'm not going to forgive you for, because that's typical of you not going to the doctors in the first place. Pneumonia is really, really dangerous, and it could have been worse. So you're not forgiven on 4 counts.
3 or 4 counts.
So there you go.
I would say we toned down the injuries just a little bit.
Okay.
Oh, really?
Just for tea time listening.
Oh,
Novice Nigel.
Jack, you silly Billy. That's all I can say. But it was the chemicals what did it. Did he say? But he was in hospital for 3 weeks.
He was, because they found that he had pneumonia and some burning to his lungs, which may well have been caused by the thing he got from the stores. You never know.
Well, a bit of both. Scarring of the lungs and all the things that go with it. And been some horrendous stuff like that going around recently. But plasma alert, we got over that. Skiving in hospital for 3 weeks, but he is a submariner, and I have to say, for a man who's occasionally suffered from claustrophobia, certainly more potholing, I'll never do that again.
So you're not a roughy. You're not a roughy tufty.
No,
kind of guy,
I thought I was, didn't say anything, but Chris Brown-Humes, he got stuck in front of me, and we all had to wait while he came out backwards.
It's a showbiz anecdote, everybody.
It wasn't good. So, Jack, you roughy-tufty submariner, 40 years on, you're forgiven.
Brother Matthew.
Look how we got onto potholing there.
Yes.
I didn't see that one coming at all. I'm probably going to forgive here because, I mean, which of us can honestly say we've not done a joke that's probably gone the wrong way, and then you've got to carry on with the joke because otherwise it loses the whole potency of the joke in the first place. And, you are dicing with danger when you do those coughing fits, but as it turned out, it was absolutely the right thing to do because he ended up in hospital. Best place for him with the pneumonia. Yeah. So I'm going to forgive.
The Confessions Podcast.
Father Simon, this confession takes me back to the start of my career. We're in the summer of 2002, and I'm 23. I was a fledgling journalist, desperate for a job, and had somehow managed to land an interview for a coveted role at a top news agency. I'd bought a smart black trouser suit, and I was confident I could do the job. The downside was that the company in question was located in a tiny village in the middle of East Yorkshire, and at that point I hadn't yet passed my driving test. Nevertheless, I set off in good time, caught the train. Unfortunately, the trains only ran what seemed like once every couple of days, and I found myself in the village an hour before my interview was due to start. No problem, I thought I'll sit in the reception area, look through my notes, and do some last-minute prep. I entered the building and introduced myself to the two gossiping receptionists sitting behind the desk. They looked at the clock. "You're really early," said one. "Well, I know, but I don't mind sitting here. I'll look through my notes." And they glanced at each other, and I sat down on the chair feeling unwelcome. A couple of minutes passed. I opened my folder, started reading. "You sure you don't want to go out for a walk or something?" says the other receptionist. "No, I'm fine, thanks," I said, and carried on. Another 30 seconds passed, that's all. "It's a long time to wait," said I'm there basically
Yes.
chucking me out.
Yeah.
"I really think you should go into the village." I started to get annoyed. "I'm fine, really, thanks," I replied. This was starting to get awkward. When she mentioned it a third time, I began to get paranoid, decided to go for a walk after all. I didn't want to annoy the company before I'd even set foot in the door. So I gathered my belongings and went outside. It was a warm, dry day, and I had no idea where to go. I had no interest in the few shops the village had, so I just kept walking. After a while, I noticed that one of the pop socks I was wearing had a ladder in it. So I found a bench in a nearby park, sat down, and removed them. As I did so, a small man in his 40s came running over to me, pointing, and said the words that still haunt me today. "I've just painted that seat!"
Oh, no.
I froze. I didn't move for what seemed like forever, and I just stared at him wide-eyed. Then slowly I stood up and peeled myself from the bench. I could hear my suit separating from the freshly painted bench with a slurp. I looked round and saw that the entire back of my once black suit was now bright green. And then all hell broke loose. "OMG!" I yelled. Not that
No,
we
you
did that in
didn't.
2002. "There's no sign to say it's been painted. I've got an interview in 40 minutes. What am I supposed to do now?" I'm screaming. The man looked worried. He thought for a few seconds and then said... What do you think he's going to say? Well,
I've got some black paint.
no, he's even stranger. He said, "Well, my wife's about your size. I'm sure she might have something you could fit."
Right.
I just stared at him. I couldn't quite believe what was happening. And then he said, "Stay here. I'll be back in a minute." And he disappeared. A few minutes later, he came rushing back with another man of a similar age.
What?
"This man lives nearer," he said. "His daughter's about your size. She'll have something you can wear."
No way.
Well, Simon, I had two choices. In the absence of any shops where I could purchase an emergency outfit, I could either go back to the interview covered in bright green paint, or I could risk going back to this man's house in the hope of finding something in his daughter's wardrobe. I chose the latter. So, so she's going.
So she's going to
She's
this...
going back to this guy's
Okay.
house. Okay.
Right, okay.
So what do you do in the park? I asked.
Yeah, let's make conversation now. Yeah, yeah.
I walk around it, he says, looking a bit confused. Brilliant, I thought. He didn't even work in the park. He's just some random bloke who happened to be walking there. We arrive at his house about 5 minutes later. "Mary," he calls in as we walk through the door. "I've got a young lady here who's got an interview in 20 minutes. She's got paint on her clothes. She needs something to wear. Could you find something of Stacey's?" A small round woman with curly brown hair appears from the kitchen. She led me upstairs without question, as though this was a regular
This
occurrence.
happens all the time. Yeah.
The bedroom was a tip with clothes everywhere. We've all got one of those. Mary starts pulling things out of the wardrobe and off the floor, trying to find something suitable. "She hasn't really got anything smart," she says.
This is a waste of time.
She's just pulled a pair of grey leggings out of the wardrobe. I surveyed the room, a renewed sense of dread washing over me. How old is your daughter?" I asked hesitantly. 12,
12!
replied
Of course.
Mary,
She's 12!
shaking her head at a small cropped top in a drawer. "Will this do?" "No, it's a cropped top." I felt like I was in a nightmare I couldn't get out of. Could be Royston Vasey, couldn't it? I couldn't for the life of me think how this scenario was going to end. Finally, Mary found a stretchy pair of black trousers, which were lurking in a screwed-up ball under the bed. I tried them on and miraculously they fitted, even if they didn't go with my smart jacket. I thanked Mary and ran back to the office. I was nearly hysterical by the time I burst into reception. I can't believe what's just happened! I blurted out to the receptionist and I told them the entire story. And as they were laughing at my misfortune, the interviewer walked through the door and said, "You're not here to have fun, you know. Shall we go up?" Anyway, I followed the interviewer up to the meeting room where another man was also sitting, and I proceeded to tell them both the story of how I came to be wearing mismatched clothes because I didn't want them to think this is how I usually dressed. Sadly, I think my fate was already sealed. Having had such a surreal experience and no chance to quietly compose myself, the 2-hour interview process was a total shambles, and unsurprisingly, I didn't get the job. So, Father Simon, I seek forgiveness from the man in the park and his family who tried to help me. I did later return the trousers by post, and also from the interviewers for completely wasting their time with a shambolic interview. A few weeks later, I did manage a successful interview, passed my driving test, and have managed 15 years without any more paint-related mishaps and going to men's houses to try on their daughters' clothes.
12.
What a bizarre... Yeah, I mean, 12. She's 12.
Oh, she's 12. Oh, right.
The guy
I'm not 12.
The guy hadn't quite worked out what the problem was there. Anyway, what an extraordinary incident here from Sarah. Bobby, what do you say?
I thought she was going to say, just give me some school uniform and I'll wear that instead. I love, what a lovely story, what a lovely park keeper. I know he should have put the sign up and he started all this, but at least he went, okay, what can I do to fix it? And found someone else, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I didn't like the receptionist. I thought they weren't very nice and they could have made you a cup of tea.
It's kind of their fault. It is kind of their fault.
Yeah, it is. Why didn't they just say, yeah, have a cup of tea? Is there anything we can help you with? That's what kind of, I don't know. I say what most normal people would do, but there.
I think you're right.
I think everybody is forgiven, and let's face it, it wasn't a job you needed. You got another one, so everything's all right. Everything came out in the wash except for the paint.
Very good.
Brother
You're
Matthew.
forgiven.
Yes. This is like the kind of nightmare that you have before the interview, isn't it? Where you think, like, going in there naked or going in there and not being able to answer any of the questions or anything like that. This is just unbelievable.
She found herself in a stranger's daughter's bedroom.
It's just
trying on 12-year-old clothes.
20 minutes to go, and I'm like, why am I in this house?
A crop top?
What? I don't know what's going on. It's superb. And also, it's the paper's loss. What a great story this would have been. Could have had this in your newspaper. And what are you doing a 2-hour interview for? Who does a 2-hour interview? If you don't know after 10 minutes, you're not hiring them.
There must have been like a paper or something.
Ridiculous. So I am going to say forgiven, obviously.
Simon Mayo's Confessions Podcast.
That was Sarah's unfortunate incident, an interview to a kill. Now, if you missed Sarah's confession, go out on the show this week, then you'd have missed the reaction on the people's verdict. But kind-hearted people that we are, we always share the best of your messages here on the podcast.
Yes, we do.
So we get messages like this. Mel in Ashton-under-Lyme. I'm sat on my driveway in the snow, crying my eyes out at today's confession. Couldn't bear to leave it. It was so funny. I think my elderly neighbours, Ken and Barbara, think I've finally flipped. Still to come, the confession that provoked an incredible range of noises in the studio.
No.
Correct. Oh, boy.
I have to say, astute Confessions listeners will not have heard that sound before. That was a laugh that came from a different register.
It was, yes, it was disbelief, because I know which confession that was.
No.
Correct. Jabba the Hutt.
It's like the new Brian Blessed. That's what you are. Right, parish notice board time, and there are lots of new notices on board, but there is one huge notice that's taking up the room, and we have to address this first. In fact, it's going to get its own musical accompaniment. Dear Simple Simon, all will be explained, Madcap Matt and Balanced Bobby. I haven't seen this. I'm not quite sure where it's going to go, but anyway.
Okay.
This story, in a large part, is down to you, Simon. Due to your constant nagging and criticism of those of us who cannot listen live to your show, I decided to try and make an extra effort, as you demanded, to try and listen live.
Okay.
I wasn't expecting anyone to take anything I say seriously. I was doing exactly that one day when I was teamed up with a colleague. We were out on patrol. Oh, I see.
Patrol.
And sent on a job by the control room. My colleague took the radio call but didn't inform me of where we were going. I was content to concentrate on your show. wondering how I'd survived so long without being able to listen live to you and your inspirational colleagues, and so was oblivious to the job that we were attending. I don't think he's a teacher, is he?
No.
Shortly after we had received the radio call, my partner pulled up outside a house on our patch and he got out of the car. I now know that he thought I knew what the job was, but I'd been so engrossed in your show that I had no idea and was just tagging along for the ride. I sauntered along behind my partner to the house, still tuned to your show, and best of all, you were reading out the day's confession about the loss of power and Heidi's not all right computer. My partner knocked on the door, and it was answered by an elderly lady who looked upset. Timing is everything in life, Father Simon, and on this occasion, my timing, or more accurately, your timing, stunk. The punchline was just being given and made me laugh out loud, just as my colleague and I were invited into the house by the lady to discuss her broken window and dead budgie.
See? There it is again.
No, obviously that's not funny.
Dead budgie?
You too.
Well, my laughter was as welcome as flatulence in an elevator.
Yeah.
And was met with disapproving looks from both my colleague and the lady in question. I realised my mistake, removed my earphones. So this is
He had his earphones.
it's a policeman,
right?
with earphones.
Listening on a call. Brilliant.
I didn't mean this. Obviously, if you're doing essential work, carry on doing the essential work. Anyway, I realised my mistake, removed my earphones and begged forgiveness for my unprofessional behaviour. The lady asked what it was I'd been listening to, and I explained truthfully, thanks. Thankfully, she was a devotee of your show. Oh, good. Okay, that's
Good.
fine. And was prepared to forgive me, but I feel I let her, my colleague, myself, and the police service down by trying to fit into your unreasonable demands.
And the budgie.
There are some people out here who work when you work and therefore cannot listen live, so are grateful for the chance to listen on the podcast. So like me, Simon, don't be simple and take it out on those devotees who cannot listen live, but be big-hearted and accept that live or on podcast, you are still a giant of broadcasting.
Yeah.
Yours in hope, Andy, not my real name, to protect my identity, from somewhere in Wales.
He's right, though.
What?
He's right. It is actually your fault because you berate people. Because you berate people so heavily. Yes, you do.
I do not.
You're really tough on them. So he thought, okay, well,
It's
I don't want to
only
be told
because
off by Simon again.
There
So
are some people that are slack. And they could be listening, but instead they're watching television.
Or working.
Or no, if you're working and earning money and that kind of thing, then obviously that's a very good excuse. It's just the slackers I'm after.
Okay.
There are some people who might be sitting in a room on their own doing nothing, or playing a video game or something like that. And what I'm saying is, stop that kind of thing.
Not good enough.
That is not good enough. Clearly, if you're a copper, carry on being a copper.
Yeah.
If you work in the NHS, carry on working
Yeah.
in it. If you're
Yeah.
teaching, carry on teaching. So, obviously, don't take anything anyone on the radio says seriously, apart from serious people.
Yes.
and the traffic news.
And also
Yes.
traffic news. Time for the section where we publicly shame those confessors whose stories are so rotten that they're not fit for mainstream radio, but is fine to snigger about on a podcast.
Apparently,
because this
yeah.
doesn't count as mainstream radio. For example, Paul's story about looking at a... I have to say, I mentioned this on the show. I do get sent these periodically through the week, and each time I'm thinking, these are getting worse.
Really?
Yeah, they're
people
definitely-
are definitely upping the ante, aren't they? Now?
Paul's story about looking in a European museum with his girlfriend and suggesting that they try what was being illustrated in the museum.
Yes.
I know where they are.
Yeah, we all know the European.
Was it a classical pose?
Euphemism.
It seemed harmless enough. No, actually, it wasn't.
Oh.
But further down the letter, Paul says it was in Amsterdam,
Yeah, there's a shock. Yeah.
the Museum of Romantic Incidents, and that.
Romantic incidents. Yeah.
And then it becomes a case of hilarious mistaken identity because the person standing next to Paul was actually a stranger who looked like his girlfriend.
Yes.
I think that's sort of...
Won't be the first time.
Sandy, although your story has a happy ending, the whole misunderstanding where you thought your dad's second wife had passed away and then he buried her and buried her in the allotment is quite upsetting. And
Brilliant.
it's still quite sad for his dog, who happened to have the same name as his wife. There was
So the dog had died.
the dog had died. The dog had been buried.
Buried in the
The dog had the same name. You can
Had
understand.
the same name as his second
Yeah, so
wife.
obviously,
Yes.
like the dog was called Angie or something, and the wife was called Angie. Yeah, Angie's
It's a little
died.
odd.
Buried
to call
Angie
the dog after the second wife.
in the garden.
Bit odd.
Although we have a degree of sympathy for Jane, her confession about her misguided attempts to flirt with her paraglider instructor on holiday won't make it on the air. Sparing you the details, let's just say that Jane was ill whilst mid-air with the instructor.
I've done something similar like
And
that.
when they landed, he was completely covered
Oh, yes.
with Jane's illness.
Yeah.
What have you been up to?
Flying over Los Angeles when there was the big earthquake, and I was airsick, and I'd ate Smarties for breakfast, and I put my head out the window.
Of the aeroplane?
Of the plane.
You know, of the helicopter.
Okay, so
in a
you're in a
helicopter.
helicopter.
Because I couldn't be... I thought, I can't do it in here, so I managed to get my head out, but of course, blowback.
Because of the rotors?
Yes, but it was. We were going to, just to let you know, we were going out with the LA gang squad in the afternoon. So I had to go wash all my clothes.
That is hardcore,
I'm so
isn't she?
sorry.
Sis?
So
Out
I had
with
to
the
wash
Bloods and the
all
Crips.
my clothes in the toilet. It was a very embarrassing moment. Anyway, I've taken it off on a tangent. My apologies.
Brilliant.
It was an enjoyable tangent.
Yeah.
And with Burns Night coming up, it's fitting to end with a big fat no to Graham's haggis confession. Just because you couldn't source the proper materials in Australia to make them a haggis, it's no excuse serving up meat wrapped inside a condom to Australian dignitaries.
What?
No. No, you're
No.
joking.
I mean, that obviously that's not a good idea. It wouldn't work. Would it work? Would it? I mean, you know, it's
I
still,
don't know.
you know,
I don't think it's edible.
None of that's okay.
no.
Send in your confessions, please, but ask yourself before you press the send button, what would Lord Reith make of it?
What would he make of it? Yeah.
Is it okay for tea time? Is it? Confessions at bbc.co.uk. On a less disgusting note, another you-rated confession has arrived in our inbox.
Oh, I love these.
These are the new ones. These are the heartwarming ones, and they balance the slightly
The filth.
unpleasantness and the filth. The filth and the fury. That would be a good name for a book. What you have to do, this has to be for nursery school, so this is just primary school and below. Dear Simon and Company, I do house cleaning, and some of my lovely customers allow me to bring my son along. He is 3.5 and not yet able to write in words. This is a transcript of his confession to me. Scene: home of an elderly lady, daytime. Mummy is vacuuming. Son: Mummy, I picked my nose and put it somewhere safe. That's from Shell.
How safe.
You have to say, we have all done that.
Yes, we have.
So that's a nasty, but we've all done it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
at least he did confess.
he
there
did.
and
So
then.
you know, it's fair enough.
So you forgive Shell's little boy?
Yes.
Our fabulous Drive Time car stickers are going spare. We've got so many to give away in such a short time. So we're going to send you a bumper sticker if you're the first to tweet the end of podcast code word, or you can get another member of your family to subscribe to the podcast, obviously photographic proof, and your address, and money will be needed.
Yes.
Send
Do
to
send
confessions.
money.
No, not money? Was
Do
that wrong?
make sure
Listen.
you send money.
Never money, you two. Never money. Chocolate money, that's all right.
Confessions at bbc.co.uk. Gareth, Bart, Susie, Lucy, Will, Tom and many more. Stickers will be with you soon because they have actually all sent in proof of borrowing relatives, friends, strangers' phones and signing them up. It's obviously fine with friends and family. It's a little bit more risky to take a stranger's phone and say, it's all right, don't call it, it's fine, I'm just subscribing you
Yes, probably don't do
to the
that.
Confessions podcast. Back to this week's confessions. Time to revisit Aaron's confession, Sisters of No Mercy.
The Confessions Podcast.
Dear Padre Mayo and the Archangels of Mercy, that's you guys. My story dates back to the early 1980s, just after I had started senior school in Derby. Now, I should say at this point that this is kind of a sibling-based confession. Yeah. Siblings do very bad things.
Okay, and this normally your reaction to it is going to be determined by where you came in the sibling.
Well, I think it may well be determined by whether you had a big sister or not. I think. But there is a level of violence in this confession, which I would say might give. I suppose this gets a PG certificate.
Okay.
Okay.
It's got a PG.
Yeah.
Okay. I was the youngest of 4 children and had lived most of my life in the shadow of my older siblings. In fact, one in particular was my arch-enemy, a loud-mouthed tomboy sister just a couple of years older than me. She took delight in daily torture rituals, including tickling, pinching, and even swinging me round with the aid of her friends. So I'm sure you'll understand I spent most of my break times trying to avoid my sister and her cronies. Now, where we lived, there was a particular park with a boating lake, including stepping stones spanning the lake's inlet. Paddling pools, where many summer hours were happily spent, they were there too. On the day in question, our family was on the bus, making our way to the park. My sister was joined by 2 of her friends. Throughout the journey, I kept hearing them whispering and plotting something, and whenever I looked over, they would quickly stop and randomly point at things out at the window, as though they were even vaguely interested. Now, I didn't fancy going for a dip in the paddling pool, or the boating lake for that matter, so when the bus pulled up at the stop, I made a swift exit and ran for it. As I was running, I turned round and saw my sister and her friends in hot pursuit. But I had the upper hand because, try as they might, they were never any match for my speed and stamina, and I soon left them trailing dust. I managed to find a really good hiding place up a tree by the lake. Just before climbing up, I gathered a handful of skimming stones that I could use in my trusty catapult, a young lad's best friend back in those days.
Different times, everyone.
Yes, that's right. It's a catapult confession. In fact, they're the words written on the top of this. Over the next hour or so, I had fun seeing how far I could get the stones to skim across the water. And then I suddenly spotted my sister and her cronies on the stepping stones. They'd all taken off their shoes because the water was running high that day, meaning water was just covering the stones. And it was at that exact moment I had a brilliant idea. Earlier that day, I'd bought a brand new bag of Steelies.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
You know them, what they are?
Yeah. The little ball bearings.
Little steel marbles. That's exactly right. So he's got a bag of those.
Bombers. What are they called?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, bombers.
My plan was to shoot a couple near to where she was standing using my catapult, which would have the consequence of her losing her footing and then falling into the river. What larks, Father Simon, that would be. I was a self-confessed catapult crack shot, and as there was a slight breeze that day, I knew I'd have to compensate by pointing my catapult slightly higher. My aim was just above my sister's head, but I knew gravity and the wind would do their bit, and the Steely should land just before the stones, thus creating the splash of water needed to make my sister jump. I released the catapult. I mean, what could go wrong?
No, nothing. I can't imagine. I mean, just above her head. Right, okay.
I released the catapult, and sure enough, I saw the Steely dropping as it made its way to the target. However, I noticed it wasn't dropping as much as I thought, and within the blink of an eye, my sister got an almighty shock as the Steely hit her smack bang on the side of her head, just above her ear. At this point, I had mixed emotions of, first one was, wow, what a shot. Second was,
Okay.
I'm dead.
Yeah.
I put my hands over my eyes momentarily, and when I took them away again, my sister had disappeared. Whilst I was wondering where she could have gone, there was, of course, an almighty splash, and what looked like the thing from the Black Lagoon rising up out of the water. It was my sister, covered in some sort of weed or algae. I saw her climb out of the water in a rage, and looking straight up at me, in the tree, she pointed and shouted, "You! You're dead, you are!" I was immediately struck with fear, the impending consequences of my foolish actions. What had I been thinking? I knew this was a really dangerous thing to do,
Yes.
and I knew that I would never ever do it again because the consequences were completely unforeseen,
Yes.
and I really should have thought about it, and now I realised that I'd been a fool.
Quite right. Well done.
I knew there was no point in running because even if I escaped now, she'd get me later on, so I thought it best to take my punishment like a man or boy. As I watched, my sister ran towards me, her face getting redder and redder. I pondered on whether I should climb down from the tree and accept my fate, or make her have to climb up to dish out the beating. I decided on the latter. I might have accepted my fate, but I wasn't going to make it easy for her, was I? At this point, my sister was now just a few feet away, and I heard her shout, "You two are dead!" I was momentarily confused. Had that bump on her head caused her to see double? Apparently not, because when I looked beneath me, I saw 2 young lads suddenly being thrown into the water by my sister. What I hadn't realised, Father Simon, was that while I'd been happily skimming stones up there in the tree, these 2 lads had been doing the same directly below me. I wish I could say that at this point I jumped down from my hiding place and confessed to my sister that she got the wrong culprits, but to my deep shame, I just sat motionless, hoping that my sister wouldn't look up in the tree and see her younger brother, whom she really loved so much. So after 30 years,
Wow.
it's time to seek forgiveness. Although not for sending my sister into the drink, I can still hear the satisfying ding noise as it hits her head. However, I do seek forgiveness from the two lads who were happily playing skimming until my sister charged at them like a raging bull. My sister, to this day, has no idea that it was me that caused her total humiliation.
Oh, superb.
And every time after that incident, when she'd be chasing me around the playground, I had the satisfaction of hearing that ding noise and knowing that she'd got some of her own medicine. Well, that's Aaron's confession, and obviously it's a very bad thing, and you don't copy Aaron, but then you don't copy Big Sister either, because neither of them were up to any good. Sister Bobby, stern face.
Well, it's difficult because obviously she's a terrible bully, and I understand how you want to teach her a lesson that you're not to be trifled with and all those things and stand up for yourself like people tell you. But the thing is, this is it, is when you do it, maybe you're not aware of all the consequences, which of course you saw and you got yourself into. The thing is, then you got two other boys into trouble and she attacked those. The thing is, it's really hard. I find it really difficult. I do forgive you for doing that to her because of course you weren't aware the circumstances. I don't forgive you for not owning up to it being you. Because you could have gone home and said to your mum, look, I did this, you have to stop this. Bullies just have to be stopped, and that is not the way.
But you have to say, a catapult and a steely is a very bad mixture.
Yes, it is. But I understand she drove him to it. What you should have done is gone back to your mum and dad and said, OK, look, I'm too frightened to walk home. Also, how dare she frighten you that much? So you're both forgiven and not forgiven.
At the same time.
At the same time.
Yes.
Brother Matthew.
I mean, isn't this just typical of younger siblings with the constant... Can't take a little bit of hijinks involving tickling from the elder sisters.
see.
I mean, come on. And has to resort to using his catapult up in a tree. I mean, really... Younger siblings, what on earth is wrong with you?
How many younger siblings do you have?
Well, I've got two.
There you go. Are you the eldest?
I'm the eldest.
I see.
And you know, and they came along and they were far cuter and all of that. Well, there's a little bit of comeback now, isn't it? Not quite so cute when you're falling in the lake with the ball bearing on the side of the head. So for that reason, I am going to forgive.
This is the place where penitents seek our pardon for their sins. Simon Mayo's Confessions Podcast.
This is an interesting one.
Okay.
I think.
Do we need a warning?
No, you don't need a warning. But she certainly takes no prisoners. And you get a little flavour here as it starts.
Okay, go on.
Dear Father Simon and the Spares.
Oh! Boom! Here come the pain.
You know what? That's fine. I'm happy with that.
Is it? I don't think so.
If you feel that
She's
way,
not
Katie.
holding out much of
Not
prospect of
forgiven.
getting any forgiveness at all. Before I start, I would just like to set the record straight. I know I am a terrible person, and I just hope that this confession doesn't lead to extreme changes in my life. Picture the scene, says Katie, a wet, grey 1990 Nottingham afternoon in an anonymous college, where three friends were hanging out and nonchalantly chatting away. These three particular friends happen to be me, ugly and clever, Ellen, pretty and stupid, and Ben, muscular and sharp-witted.
Ugh.
Okay?
Taken against Ben already.
Instant judgments made. We had made the tough and long travel through primary school into secondary school, now round the bend into college life, still being best chums throughout. Our parents and peers would say we were inseparable, and they were probably right. We were, if I speak for ourselves, the definition of good friendship. Anyhow, on this dull and dreary afternoon, where we sat around our favourite table playing cards, Ben stood up and left to go to the bathroom. Can I tell you something? Said Ellen, looking excited. Can I tell you something? What? I replied. I think I'm in love with Ben, she said. I think I have been for years. But do you think he likes me back? Because I've been getting all these signals from him, but I don't want to ruin our friendship, you know? Well, Father Simon, to say I was shocked to my very core was an understatement. The idea of my two best friends together was mind-boggling. Yes, I had noticed a little bit of strange behaviour between the two, but we were always weird people in that way. My mind started to, well, what happens if they break up or go and leave me on my own? All these horrible nightmarish thoughts were racing through my head so fast that all I could say was, oh, I see. A couple of days passed with nothing more said about the conversation. But when me and Ben were walking home through the park one day, I suddenly popped the question with the force only seen in those cheesy American crime dramas. "Do you fancy Ellen?" I said.
What crime dramas are you watching? No one ever says that in mine.
Cheesy ones.
Oh, right.
"Do you fancy Ellen?" Ben suddenly stopped, open-mouthed, and stammered, "How did you know?
Oh.
Is it really that obvious?"
Ugh.
"It's just that I like her so much." Well, I was astounded. Interesting audible reaction.
This is so lovely.
Sweet
Is
and
it?
blessed, sweet and blessed.
Is it really? Carry on, Ben.
I was astounded. I hadn't seen this coming at all, and all of a sudden a flood of images came to mind of me alone and those two snogging. In an air of desperation, I threw caution to the wind and replied, "Yes, it is very obvious. Very obvious. I only bring it up because Ellen has started to notice, and she doesn't have a good way of telling you that she is
No.
that she is not interested.
Correct.
And if you carry on,
Yep.
she might have to punch you in the face.
Correct. Well done.
I'm very sorry to tell you." "Oh," he sighed. "That's okay, I suppose." With an expression on his face which you would think you would only get if your puppy, kitten and rabbit had all met their maker at the same time. Ben quickly stopped showing any interest in Ellen, and as the weeks went on, Ellen gloomily presumed that her one true love had lost interest in her, and slowly the situation was forgotten about. This is where my real confession comes into play. The real reason why I didn't want my two besties to get together was not because I was afraid of our friendship group getting ripped apart. Much worse than that, Father Simon. Basically, I fancied the pants off Ben.
Oh.
And no one, especially pretty Ellen, was going to take him away from me. I lied and manipulated to get my own way, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. What makes this even worse is that me and Ben are now happily married. We have a child. And 28 years later, he still has no idea that I stopped him from receiving his true love all those years ago. Plus, it's bad. This is bad, and it's a wash already on the text. Not forgiven. I haven't even asked yet. Not forgiven. Not forgiven. Not forgiven. Ellen is still single and was forced to be my maid of honour and watch me and her apparent soulmate walk down the aisle 20 years ago this weekend. Happy anniversary, sweetheart.
Yeah.
If you could see the look on Bobby's face. In fact, when this confession was sent to me by producer Phil, it said at the top, "I want to know what Bobby says about this one." Okay, we're about to find out. Katie says, "I beg for your penitence, but expect none, as I am perfectly happy with the man I love and who loves me." Now I forced him to. And then says, "And I would encourage anyone to do the same as me."
Oh, right. Okay.
At this point, Katie's just thinking, you know what?
Yeah, throw it all in.
I stand in no chance at all of getting any. And I have to say, in terms of sheer bald cheek, and throwing all caution to the wind, this absolutely takes the biscuit. Katie would like, well, I don't know whether she cares, but anyway, Bobby with her serious face on says this.
Ask Matt first.
Okay.
I'm trying to construct a sentence.
Okay.
Well,
this is good. Let's.
For radio.
Here
I
comes
get
Matt.
the feeling that most people are going to come out against Katie. So
You
here's going to be the defence of Katie. Number one, Ben with his muscles and his sharp mind. Fooling no one, Ben. We all know, dead inside. Whereas the friend really good looking, using her boom shakalak wiles, all that kind of stuff. What's wrong with Katie using her mind? Yeah? Think about it. Correct. So for that reason, I am gonna forgive, just because of Ben with his
Matt. They wanted to get together.
Yeah,
she stopped them.
Well,
then said,
"Yeah, but do you
Be
know
our-
what?
be our maid of honour."
Maybe love would have found a way, but it didn't, did it? No. So turns out the other two were destined for each other. Unlucky, Ben. So yeah, forgiven.
So now Bobby, I don't know if Bobby's composed herself.
I have. I have very little to say, obviously, Katie. I mean, I didn't care you called me a spare. I can live with that. That's fine. That's all right. However...
It's not really.
Well, no, it is. Really. That's not a bother.
No.
What is a bother is the fact that you've been second choice for 22 years.
Ooh, burn!
You know,
Yes.
good luck with
Second
that.
choice, Katie. That's how she's known.
Second choice, Katie. And, you know, he loves you, but he's always pining after her, and you're still friends. Every time
And
he
you know
sees
that
her...
hollow look behind his eyes?
Yep, that's Ellen. His love for Ellen. So good luck with that, Katie. Hope that works out for you.
Put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Simon Mayo's Confessions podcast.
That was Katie's utterly shocking confession, "Our friend's pathetic," which prompted this reaction on the People's Verdict. Forgiven, Simon, we'd all do the same if we had to. I am, however...
Yes, no, go on.
we wouldn't.
Yes.
I am now waiting for Ben's letter to Graham Norton's Saturday show saying that he still fancies the maid of honour.
Yay!
And should he leave his wife?
Yes. No.
Correct. Oh, boy.
That's like your Father Christmas audition, isn't it?
Yeah.
The day after her confession went out on air, Katie got back in touch to give us an update on the reaction. Well, what a whirlwind couple of hours it's been.
I'll bet.
There I was on the driveway. There I was driving away listening to your fabulous show when my husband called and said he needed picking up from the station. As I arrived at the station and led him into the car in almost poetic justice, confessions started. Remember, this is Ben who's in the story. I have never had a more tense car ride in my life. As the confession progressed, I watched my now less muscular husband, his face go from befuddlement to realisation that it was him we were talking about, then to complete shock. We all sat in silence all the way home, where after a good long talk, we found the funny side of the situation. I can reveal that all is well and that no affairs have been had between Ben and Ellen, as one of your listeners had suggested, with feelings on Ben's side very much gone. So he says. I would like to apologise for breaking Bobby and say that this evil, selfish action is very much the exception rather than the rule. Well, I would have apologised if it wasn't for Bobby's mean comment about me being second choice to my husband. I may never listen to the traffic in the same way again. I think the people... thank the people for the kind, if undeserving, verdict. I just wish that the 27 phone calls I've had from family and friends who listened to the confession were just as kind. But hey, you can't win anything. I haven't heard back from Ellen, but I hope to soon, and will keep you posted. From a very ashamed Katie.
Well, that's the first acknowledgement of shame. She did. She can say it was mean, but she didn't offer any
contrition. No, she wasn't ashamed at all, because she got a husband and she got the...
And not only that, she said she was so proud she'd do it again. That makes me very, very worried. Look, we all live and game by who we are.
That's the followers, Ellen, Katie and Ben. Thank you very much, Lee, Katie, for the honest follow-up. Now, that concludes this week's batch of confessions. Maybe it's inspired you to send in your own dark little secret, confessions@bbc.co.uk. Before we leave you, another treat from the Confessions Crypt. This week's has been requested by Tom on Facebook and Brian from Fife, who emailed to say, please, can you dig out that brilliant confession concerning the awful boss in charge of a garden centre and an employee who volunteered to plant a lot of end-of-season bulbs on the embankment outside the garden centre. From what I remember, there were 3 types of bulbs planted: crocuses, daffodils and tulips, all coming up at different times. You're precisely right, Tom and Brian. We called it Flowers in the Rain, and it went like this.
The Confessions podcast.
Father Simon and the collective, I had been working for a local garden centre for a few years, a place well known and well respected in the area, with a large clientele consisting of many well-to-do folk who sought advice daily, generally on inane issues: pests, disease, how to rid the croquet lawn of a single weed, that kind of thing. But everything was great. I loved going to work, the sunshine and fresh air, the people and my colleagues. All bar one, that is, and that's my boss, Neil, who was the rudest, most arrogant man anyone has ever come across. Over the years, I saw firsthand what a rubbish boss he was, talking down to me, embarrassing all of us in front of customers, taking credit for any work done, making sure there would be no pay rises or bonus for 4 consecutive years, and playing on the fact that we all essentially enjoyed the work. The team was split into us and them, those who had been there for less than 10 years and knew that life outside the garden centre existed, and those that had been there since hanging baskets were made out of dinosaur skin. Anyway, summer was coming to an end, and having seen 2 of my co-workers actually break out and leave to go to other branches, I decided that it had to be my time, and I planned my escape. I'd always fancied going it alone and becoming a gardener, so I began to buy the kit that I needed for this, with a plan to escape before the following busy spring season. This was going to be a long-term plan of revenge. It was late September and the shelves were fully stocked with spring bulbs, so day by day I acquired a bag at a time and stored them away in one of the storage sheds that nobody really ever looked in. This went on for 3 weeks. Not theft, because they were never removed from company property. I suggested to the boss that I would plant up the tubs at the front gate with spring bulbs, and I'd do it in my own time, as that's how committed I was to the company. So one sunny September evening, once everyone else had left, still wearing my uniform, I took a barrow full of bulbs, trowels and spades out to the front of the garden centre, which had long sloping grass verges to either side of the main gate. I began work, on my knees at the roadside, dutifully planting the tubs with what would become a spectacular display the following spring. And as it happens, would be a memory of me, as I'd be gone by the time they bloomed.
Here we go.
Night one, I planted crocus. It took me hours, and I didn't finish until dark, but I didn't care. The following week, I stayed on once again, this time planting daffodils. Hundreds of them, carefully digging to avoid disturbing my previous week's work. Only stopping to talk to the occupants of the police car that had stopped to inquire what I was doing gardening at 9 p.m. in the dark. Check back in the spring, I told them with a smile. It should be a great display. Eventually, after 4 planting sessions and more than 20 hours' work, I stood back, proud of what I had achieved, and yet the grass looked untouched. No one else could see or knew what I'd achieved. I had to time my resignation just right, not only to make sure that I dropped him in it and left him short-staffed, with nobody else knowing a great deal about the recent new technology I'd installed, but also to exact the perfect revenge. So I handed in my notice at the end of January. 4 weeks later, it was my last day. 3 weeks after that, I left. I received a phone call from one of my friends that I used to work with. She could hardly control herself on the other end of this phone. The laughter was ear-piercing, but after a few minutes I managed to confirm the source of the laughter. I hopped into my car, took a little trip to where I'd once been employed. As I neared the garden centre, I could see a handful of people on the raised footpath that ran along the opposite side of the road, and lots of pointing and sniggering. I couldn't help but smile. It had worked, Father Simon. 5 hours of hard work on that chilly September night months before, and there, on the long sloping grass front, were close to 2,000 purple crocuses, all in full bloom, standing proud and tall, and in 3-foot-high letters, 15-foot long, spelling out the perfect message: Neil C. has a tiny... Mr. Happy. 3 weeks later, I had another phone call from an old colleague in the same area. Again, in 3-foot-high letters and 25 feet long, the message now had bloomed: Neil loves sheep. It stayed for nearly a week. And nobody told Neil, my old boss, knowing that he always turned out of the gate the same way every night like clockwork. I'd put this one at the other end of the grass. Apparently he thought the daffs looked beautiful. Nobody had told him what it spelt. Another 2 weeks passed, but this time I couldn't stay away. Every night I drove past to see progress. Leaves were forming, but nothing was obvious yet. Then as March ended, my final work was unveiled. 10 feet high, spanning the entire depth of the grass slope, and at around 100 feet in length, was a shower of dwarf tulips, bright red, vibrant and shimmering. The message: free £25 gift voucher. Then in slightly smaller but still very obvious letters: no purchase, no catch. So, says TJ, seek forgiveness not from that awful man, he deserved it all and more, but from my ex-colleagues who had to explain to hundreds of people why they couldn't have a voucher. To the poor, well-to-do folk who had to see those rude words spelt out in such a beautiful way. Obviously, I changed and moved them as we went through. And also to the new manager who took over shortly afterwards and had to deal with the continuing fallout from the lack of free gift vouchers, for there were none. Inventive TJ with the patience of a saint to get revenge 6 months after leaving. What do you say?
Unbelievable how much work went into this.
Lots.
I mean, when you just think about how long those sentences
20 hours work.
20 hours work. He must have really hated his boss. I think this is a classic example of revenge being a dish best served cold. I think it's just brilliant. And absolutely inventive, imaginative, and it worked. So well done, TJ.
Wonderful display. Mother Superior, what do you think?
Who amongst us would not like to wreak revenge on a boss who's given you such a horrible time and you really hated your job? I think it's absolutely fantastic, and I think the timing part of it was great. Although I would have thought he would have needed more than 20 hours to do all the work he says he did, unless he was really brilliant at spelling with bulbs. I mean, that's a skill in itself, isn't it, really? But anyway, I think it's brilliant, and I think I do feel a bit sorry for the people who thought they were going to get 25 quid. That's not very nice. And
they were fine.
You could have just gone on to say what various parts of his anatomy look like.
Well, I think that was nicely
that.
spelled out, actually. I had to change that bit.
You did?
Yeah.
Very well done. You're totally forgiven.
What do you say, Brother Matthew?
I'm going to go against the grain here. I've had enough of bosses trying to be your best mate. And frankly, if I were a boss, I'd want to be exactly like Neil. I would want to take credit for things that weren't down to me. I'd want to make everyone else's life hell. That's the point of being a boss. Stop trying to be my best mate. I want to be the boss. So I'm with Neil on this. TJ, frankly, it was petty and small-minded. And no need. So not forgiven.
Simon Mayo's Confessions podcast.
That was your confession from the crypt for this week, featuring on forgiveness. There was Rebecca.
Yes, Sally was there as well.
And Mother Superior. I'm surprised. It was actually quite risque, actually. I was surprised it was as risque as it was.
Yes.
Did you not think?
Yes, I spotted
the reference to...
Yes, we all heard the reference, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think that was toned down.
Was it?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Mm-hmm. If there's something that you want to request, if there's a confession that you particularly remember, confessions@bbc.co.uk with as many details as possible, and we'll try and find it with our unique filing system. Sister Bobby, you forgave 1.5 and did not forgive 2.5. The halves come from you both forgiving and not forgiving Aaron, which was slightly confusing. You forgave him as he didn't mean to hurt his sister, but he should have owned up. That was your reasoning.
Yep.
So your 6.5 forgives, 4.5 not forgives. Matt, you forgave everybody.
Yes,
as
I
per
did.
normal.
Yes, quite right.
So it's 10
Come
to
on.
1 in your favour. If you've got something to get off your chest, on the email, please. If you made it to the end of the last podcast, I ask you to tweet, separate yourself from yourself. Thanks to Hannah, who gets the sticker, and Joe, Matt, Sandra, Louise, David, Ann, and Jessica, aged 8, who chooses to listen to the podcast rather than have a bedtime story.
Wow.
Really?
Really?
Cost effective.
It's because it's longer.
Do you think?
Yeah.
I think what we could include me reading a chapter of a book at the end.
If only there were a book that you could read from.
I could read one of mine.
Yes.
What do you think? Would that break any rules?
No, that'll be fine.
This week's code phrase is, who on earth has Friday clothes? Which I do stand by, actually, because Bobby wears the same on a Friday as a Thursday, so do you,
Yes,
so do I.
yeah.
Anyway, remember, it's at times like these you should subscribe to the podcast, so don't forget you can hear the whole radio show every weekday from 5 because we're here. Stop your slackness, unless you're a policeman or involved in essential work, in which case, carry on.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening. We're on Radio 2. This has been a Radio 2 podcast. Thank you very much. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
The Confessions podcast. Go in peace.